comes the word that I've declared that New York is to be swept away by a tidal wave. This I've never said. I have said as I looked at the great buildings. This is New York City. This is the skyline. Do you see the great buildings? Okay. I have said as I looked at the great buildings going up there, story after story, what terrible scenes will take place when the Lord shall arise to shake terribly the earth. Then the words of Revelation 18 will be fulfilled. I have no light in particular in regard to what is coming on New York, only that I know one day the great buildings there will be thrown by the turning and overturning of God's power. So this is the great buildings, and that she says will come down when the mighty angel of Revelation 18 comes down. Do you see the great buildings here? Do you? Do you? Okay, Brother Leo. There's the skyline before 9/11. Do you see the great buildings of New York City? Those are the great buildings of New York City. And on September 11th, 2001, the great buildings of New York City came down. And the mighty angel of Revelation 18 verses 1 through 3 came down. And those verses began to be fulfilled.
Revelation 18 verses 1 to 3. According to Jeff Peppinger, the quote in Life Sketches, page 411, began to be fulfilled in 2001, and Ellen G. White saw the Twin Towers in 1903. We are going to examine this quotation in Life Sketches, page 411, to see if Jeff Peppinger has the correct view. Let's go to question number 1. Was it a vision or an observation? Under date of August 3, 1903, Mistress White further wrote regarding this sensational report. Now comes the word that I've declared that New York is to be swept away by a tidal wave. This I've never said. I have said as I looked at the great buildings going up there, story after story. That's Life Sketches, page 411. Ellen White said, as I looked and saw the great buildings going up there, story after story. It was an observation, not a vision. During the time of Ellen G. White, there were a few buildings rising story after story. Two of these great buildings were the Flatiron skyscraper and the MetLife Tower, found in New York City. Ellen G. White looked at the buildings and exclaimed, what terrible scenes will take place when the Lord shall arise to shake terribly the earth. These two renowned buildings are still functional today. Ellen G. White was not saying these buildings will have to be to Christ's second coming, but she used these buildings as an example of how the great buildings will be destroyed when the Lord shall arise to shake terribly the earth. We are now going to take a closer look at these two buildings. The first building is called the Flatiron Building, originally the Fuller Building. This building was completed in the year 1902, almost at the time that Ellen G. White made the statement in Life Sketches, page 411. Let's read the quotation here by Wikipedia. The Flatiron Building, originally the Fuller Building, is a triangular 22-story steel-framed landmark building located at 175th Avenue in the borough of Manhattan, New York City, and is considered to be a groundbreaking skyscraper. Upon completion in 1902, it was one of the tallest buildings in the city at 20 floors high. So it was over 20 floors high. It was 22-story. We are now going to take a look at the second building. The second building is called the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company Tower, colloquially known as the MetLife Tower. The construction began November 1893. So this is 10 years before Ellen G. White made the statement in 1903 of Life Sketches, page 411. This building was completed in 1909. Therefore, it was one of the buildings that Ellen G. White observed in New York City in her own day. It was the tallest building in the world from 1909 to 1913. It was 50-story high. It is a landmark skyscraper located on Madison Avenue near the intersection with East 23rd Street across from Madison Square Park in Manhattan, New York City. In 1903, Ellen G. White spoke of the buildings of her own day, rising story after story. She was not in vision, but it was her observation as she saw the constructions with her own eyes. What shall the Lord arise to shake? Let's read. What terrible scenes will take place when the Lord shall arise to shake terribly the earth? Then the words of Revelation 18, 1-3 will be fulfilled. The whole of the 18th chapter of Revelation is a warning of what is coming on the earth. Life Sketches, page 411 by Ellen G. White. What shall the Lord arise to shake? Terribly the earth, not New York. Ellen White spoke of the many scenes when the Lord shall arise to shake terribly the earth. And in shaking terribly the earth, New York City will also be demolished. She was speaking on a general standpoint, not on a specific standpoint of New York City. Did Ellen G. White had any specific or particular light about New York City in 1903? Let's read. But I have no light in particular in regard to what is coming on New York. Only I know that one day the great buildings there will be thrown down by the turning and overturning of God's power. Now, this statement is a general statement. We can say this about any city, that one day the great buildings in Chicago, San Francisco, or just about anywhere will be thrown down by the turning and overturning of God's power. Not only New York. Let's continue to read. She had no particular light. She knew that one day God would shake terribly the earth according to the Bible, but not specific light about New York. This was in 1903. How many times shall the Lord arise to shake terribly the earth? Isaiah 13 verse 13 reads, Therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth shall remove out of her place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts, and in the day of his fierce anger. This verse is telling you about the day of the Lord. And God said, in the day of the Lord, I will shake heavens and the earth out of her place. Haggai 2 verse 6. For thus shall the Lord of hosts, yet once, yet how many? Yet once, it is a little while, and I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land. In these two scriptures, it is clear that God will arise to shake the earth one more time. Haggai 2 verse 21. I will shake the heavens and the earth. Hebrews 12 verse 16. But now he had promised, saying, Yet once more I shake not the earth only, but also heaven. It is quite clear that God will shake the earth one more time. So when God arises to shake terribly the earth, he's talking about that grand, final shaking of the earth, which is very terrible. What are the scenes associated with the Lord shaking terribly the earth. Isaiah chapter 2, verse 12 reads, For the day of the Lord of hosts shall be upon everyone that is proud and lofty, and upon everyone that is lifted up, and he shall be brought low. Verse 15, And upon every high tower, and upon every fence wall. Verse 21, To go into the clefts of the rocks, and into the tops of the rugged rocks, for fear of the Lord, and the glory of his majesty, when he what? Ariseth to shake terribly the earth. Jeff Peppinger, Jamal Sankey, Dario Taylor, and the other offshoots said that the high towers in Zephaniah 1 was fulfilled in the year 2001 in New York City. But what did Ellen G. White said? Let us read. During the reign of Josiah, the word of the Lord came to Zephaniah, specifying plainly the results of continued apostasy and calling the attention of the true church to the glorious prospect beyond. His prophecies, whose prophecies? Zephaniah, of impending judgment upon Judah apply with equal force to the judgments that are to fall upon an impenitent world at the time of the second advent of Christ. The great day of the Lord is near, it is near, and hasteth greatly. Even the voice of the day of the Lord, the mighty man shall cry there bitterly. That day is a day of wrath, a day of trouble and distress, a day of wasteness and desolation, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness, a day of the trumpet and alarm against the fenced cities and against the high towers. Zephaniah 1 verses 14 to 16. Review and Herald, July 15, 1915, paragraph 6. Prophets and Kings, page 389 by Ellen G. White. Nahum 1 verses 4 to 7 reads, He rebuked the sea. He rebuked the what? The sea. And make it dry. And dry it up all the rivers. Does this statement sound like the fourth plague? Bashan languished, and Carmel and the flower of Lebanon languished. The mountains quake at him, and the hills melt, and the earth is burnt at his presence, yea, the world and all that dwell therein. This definitely sounds like the second coming. This will be repeated to the very letter. Verse 6. Who can stand before his indignation? And who can abide in the fierceness of his anger? His fury is poured out like fire, and the rocks are thrown down by him. What is another name for the day of the Lord? Let's read Joel chapter 2 verse 11. For the day of the Lord is great and very terrible. Who can abide it? Now this verse sounds very similar to the verse below. Revelation 6 verse 17. For the great day of his wrath is come. Who shall be able to stand? So the former verse said, who can abide it? And this verse is saying, who shall be able to stand? These two verses sound like the verse in Nahum chapter 1, which says, who can abide in the day of his indignation? Let us look at Revelation 16 verse 1. And I heard a great voice. So this great voice should be the Lord's voice out of the temple, saying to the seven angels, go your ways and pour out the vials of the wrath of God upon the earth. So we see that the wrath of God is poured upon the earth when he arises to shake terribly the earth. So the earth will shake terribly with various plagues. And this is called the Day of Wrath. The false prophets claim that the Day of the Lord began in 2001 when the Twin Towers fall. However, the Bible paints a far different picture that the Day of the Lord will begin at the time of the 7 last plagues and will continue to the second coming of Christ, all the way down to the third coming of Christ after the millennium. So the Day of the Lord will continue all the way to the third coming, when the elements shall melt with fervent heat. But the Day of the Lord will begin at the time of the 7 last plagues. Now Malachi 4 verse 5 tells us that a special group of people will come before the Day of the Lord. So therefore the Day of the Lord cannot begin 2001 because Elijah did not come before. Elijah must come before the Day of the Lord. Let us read. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he shall turn the hearts of the fathers towards the children, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. Now Elijah in our time, our future, will be the 144,000. The curse represents the 7 last plagues and continuing down to the third coming of Christ. So therefore, the Day of the Lord have to come after Elijah is on the scene, the 144,000. Let us read Revelation 13 verse 9 to 11. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God. A loud voice represents the loud cry. This is when it swells into a loud cry. The same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God. So the wine of the wrath of God comes after the loud cry, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. So without mixture represent that no mercy will be in this judgment, just undiluted judgment, undiluted plagues. No mercy of God will be involved. And into the cup of his indignation. Now in Nahum chapter 1, the Bible reads, who may abide in the day of his indignation? And Revelation 6 verse 17, he said, who shall be able to stand? Notice the second angel does not come with a loud voice in Revelation 14:8, because it will swell into a loud cry, causing the first and the third angel messages to swell. It's cause to effect. The more Babylon fall, the more the first and the third messages will be proclaimed. So therefore, the more Babylon fall, the more the second angel message swell, is the more the first and third will also swell into a loud cry. When shall the Lord arise? If we look in the Strong's Concordance, the word stand in Daniel 12 verse 1 means to arise. Daniel 12 verse 1, at that time shall Michael stand up, which means at that time shall Michael arise, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was, since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, everyone that is found written in the book. The time of trouble is also called a time of wrath. It's also called the Day of the Lord. Let's continue. At Daniel 12 verse 1, he said, at that time. While in Matthew chapter 24 verse 21, it says, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since. For then shall be the same thing as at that time, such as was not since the beginning of this world, to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days be shortened, there should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. the great tribulation or the great time of trouble, which is the period which we have the 7 last plagues called the day of wrath or the day of the Lord, vengeance. What does will be fulfilled actually mean? Then Revelation 18, 1-3 will be fulfilled. Life Sketches, page 411. Does this means no beginning or completely fulfilled? Is the statement saying that the angel is now beginning his work or completely fulfilled? Let's look at another statement made by Ellen G. White in Acts of the Apostles, page 33. He will come in his own glory and in the glory of his Father, and all the angelic hosts will escort him on his way. This will be fulfilled. Christ promised to his disciples, I will come again or receive you unto myself. John 14:13, Acts of the Apostles, page 33. When Christ come again, this will be fulfilled, which was the promise that he would return. It is the same thing with the quote in Life Sketches, page 411. When the buildings fall, Revelation 18, 1-3, which is the preaching of the gospel, would be completed, would be fully fulfilled, would be finished. Christ would say, he that is filthy, let him be filthy still. It is finished. To be fulfilled or will be fulfilled is always referring to a complete fulfillment, not a partial fulfillment. Many deceived their own selves on this point. Let's read this quotation. The first years of Jehoiakim's reign were filled with warnings of approaching doom. Now, the first year of Jehoiakim's reign was approximately 608 BC. The word of the Lord spoken by the prophets such as Jeremiah and Moses, was about to be fulfilled. This is a complete fulfillment because the partial fulfillment had started long before. We will see this in the next slide. Let's continue to read. The Assyrian power to the northward, long supreme, was no longer to rule the nations. Egypt on the south, in whose power the king of Judah was vainly placing his trust, was soon to receive a decided check. All unexpectedly, a new world power, the Babylonian Empire, was rising to the eastward and swiftly overshadowing all other nations. Prophets and Kings, page 422.1 by Ellen G. White. In the previous quotation, Ellen G. White said that the word spoken by the prophets was about to be fulfilled. However, that was a complete fulfillment. Was about to be fulfilled or will be fulfilled is always referring to a complete fulfillment, not a partial fulfillment, because the partial fulfillment had started years before. Let's read this quotation as a proof. Moses traced the evils that would result from a departure from the statutes of Jehovah, calling heaven and earth to witness. He declared that if, after having dwelt long in the land of promise, the people should introduce corrupt forms of worship and bow down to graven images, and should refuse to return to the worship of the true God, the anger of the Lord would be aroused, and they would be carried away captive and scattered among the heathen. So this is a prophecy of Moses. This prophecy fulfilled in part in the time of the judges. So therefore, it was fulfilled in part before in the time of the judges when Israel and Judah had no king. Let's continue. It met a more complete and literal fulfillment in the captivity of Israel in Assyria and of Judah in Babylon. Prophets and Kings, page 296 by Ellen G. White. Therefore, Judah in Babylon is a complete fulfillment. This is what Ellen G. White said, that the word spoken by the prophets was about to be fulfilled, and she was speaking of Judah in Babylon. This is the complete fulfillment. To be fulfilled is always referring to a complete fulfillment, not a partial.
During the time of Ellen G. White, the Lord cry had already begun. Let's read from Review and Herald, page 639 by Ellen G. White. The time of test is just upon us, for the loud cry of the third angel has already begun in the revelation of the righteousness of Christ, the sin pardon Redeemer. This is the beginning of the light of the angel whose glory shall fill the whole earth. So, the angel had already begun in the revelation of the righteousness of Christ. Let's continue to another quote. Reading from Testimonies to Ministers and Gospel Workers, page 91 and 92, also found in Last Day Events, page 200. The Lord in His great mercy sent a most precious message to His people through Elder Wagner and A.T. Jones. This message was to bring more prominently before the world the uplifted Savior, the sacrifice for the sins of the whole world. It presented justification through faith in His surety. It invited the people to receive the righteousness of Christ, which is made manifest in obedience to all the commandments of God. Going down, it is the third angel's message which is to be proclaimed with a loud voice and attended with the outpouring of His Spirit in a large measure. So this message of righteousness by faith, God sent it more prominently to Wagner and Jones, and they were to bring this message more prominently before the world. It is the third angel's message which is to be proclaimed with a loud voice and attended with the outpouring of His Spirit in a large measure. This angel of Revelation 18 had already begun his work and did not begin 2001. I hope all who listen to this presentation will be able to see the deception and the lies that is in Jeff Peppinger's ministry. Please take heed to the word of God, that many false prophets shall arise and deceive many. But Bible says, when you see these things, look up, for our redemption draweth nigh.
In the book Testimonies to Ministers, there's a quotation that said, many times offshoot movements connect their work with the angel of Revelation 18 or the work of the other angel. But let us read this quotation from Review and Herald, July 5, 1906. Not many years ago, a brother laboring in New York City published some very startling notices regarding the destruction of that city, which is New York. I wrote immediately to the ones in charge of the work. So Ellen White wrote immediately to the ones in charge of the work. They are saying that it is not wise to publish such notices, that thus an excitement might be aroused which would result in a fanatical movement hurting the cause of God. So a fanatical movement may arouse because of the destructions of New York City. So Ellen White cautioned, do not publish such notices because it might result in a fanatical movement hurting the cause of God. It is enough to present the truth
of the Word of God to the people, startling notices are detrimental to the progress of the work. Review and Herald, July 5, 1906. So to dwell upon one city and the destruction of one city, Ellen White cautioned that it might result in a fanatical movement speaking about the destruction of that certain city, New York City. And we have seen that this quotation has been fulfilled in the fanatical movement of Jeff Peppinger, Jamal Sankey, Dario Taylor, and others.